the really interesting thing about children's sleep is that the biggest influencing factor is the parent. And so really it actually comes down to influencing and changing parent behavior. And once parent behavior changes, children's behavior changes like clockwork. And it's about really personalizing the solution to the family and to their needs, especially in today's world where people are busy and there's split households and there's multiple caregivers involved and there's daycare and there's just a whole host of different variables. Do you want to co-sleep with your child? Do you have a sibling that they share a room with? All of these variables change the way that a parent needs to interact with that child in order to get them to that goal. And so really, I would say the secret sauce is that it's a hyper-personalized experience to a family unit.
Awesome. I'm live with Gigi Brett, co-founder of Batelle. It's awesome to have you here today, Gigi.
Thank you, John, for having me. Great to be here.
Yes, yes. We're both a little bit sleep deprived, or we've made sacrifices on our sleep, which I think is ironic because we're going to be talking about the sleep school that you all have built for parents and their kids. And we've partnered on the B2B side in order to showcase Battelle as a wellness offering to our community and benefits recipients. So I'm excited to get deeper into the story of, how and why you built this company and sort of some of the learnings that you have discovered as you built something that's focused on helping parents sleep train their babies and their children. And maybe for those that don't know who you are, Battelle is a quick introduction on both, and then we can get into it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we teach parents how to put their children to bed in 5 minutes or less and sleep through the night in 2 weeks. And kind of the inception, I'll go back a backstory. So I'm from South Africa. I moved over to the UK, 10 years ago. Originally went to Oxford to study law, specifically because I was looking for kind of the point of leverage in the system. And I thought it was the legal structure, and then soon realized that there was a ton of red tape and bureaucracy around legal systems. Um, and I moved over to the builder side about 5 years ago now. And Damien and I, so Damien's my co-founder, we met about 3 years ago now. And really what drew us kind of together was this real interest and intrigue in sort of this intersection between healthcare and education. And, we're focused sort of primarily in the US, but the healthcare system in the US there's so many flaws, it's so broken. The education system globally is so broken. I mean, from South Africa, I've got a specifically acute sort of example that I've grown up with. And what's really interesting is that a huge lever for both is just moving upstream. And, 0 to 6 years old of a child's life is the most formative time. It lays down their health baseline, their education baseline, and their habit baseline. And yet parents are more or less left to muddle through this super formative, super crucial time. And there's a lot of noise and a lot of different, often very polarizing views, but it really lacks the source of truth. And this sort of at this intersection, there were a number of levers that we were looking at, and sleep was the one that was kind of the key one. And the reason is that it's a contagious problem. So it's a high pain for a parent. It's contagious in the sense of if you have a child not sleeping, it's not just the child that doesn't sleep. You have at least one caregiver not sleeping, usually more. And the contagion doesn't unfortunately stop there. It extends to if one or two of those parents are working parents, it extends to that business. It costs the business in terms of the employee's productivity. It increases the rate of retention, increases the churn. It increases the number of sick days parents might have to go to either for their child or for the doctor. There's just a whole host of downstream consequences as a result of one child not sleeping. And I think what the sort of the genesis of this is that sleep is actually a very solvable problem. And that is kind of at its core what we set out to prove and what we've kind of been building with Batelle over the last sort of 2.5, 3 years now.
Okay, cool. A lot to jump into. So, first thing you mentioned, you're initially going down the path of law school, and that's something that I considered way back when as well. It's as a point of leverage. What do you mean by that?
Good question. I knew I wanted to have sort of systemic change on something. And it wasn't so much the what, it was more being able to do good and apply my skill set to sort of the maximum capacity to get maximum output. And I saw a lot that was wrong with the actual structure itself in terms of the legal structure and the flaws and the kinks and the incentives and the outputs as a result of how that structure is sort of set up. And I wanted to go and sort of tackle it head on, and I think quite naively at the time. Um, and I think the other thing was I was pulled to law because I loved it. I'm such a nerd in terms of my legal background because I actually studied 2 law degrees for my sins. I studied my first in Cape Town in South Africa, then my second in the UK, and I just love the logical rigor and the analysis and sort of the it just it took, I gained so much from it. So I think I started off with quite a uh, I would say naive view of what it would do, but then ended up loving it, but never actually applying it. So I never actually practiced law. I sort
Oh,
of
but you actually went through the whole school?
twice, well for two, exactly. But I never practiced because I sort of in the study I realized that with the legal system it was very black and white. Something was either right or wrong, and I preferred to be in the gray area because in life there's so much nuance and so much gray. And that was sort of one of the defining moments when I realized that it probably wasn't going to be my lifelong career, and that my skill set and my sort of propensity to roll up my sleeves and take risks was sort of better suited elsewhere.
That's cool. Yeah,
What was your
that, that's a fun step. I was, I mentioned before we went live that I was really interested in the natural food space and just all the issues and problems with how we eat and food access and affordability and all that. So after working in the natural foods and CPG space, I actually thought I would go into food law. One of the employers that I had worked for had funded a food law program here in LA at UCLA. So I was studying for my LSAT there. And I had the prize right in front of me. I was like, oh, I could go to this school where I'm actually studying. And it was, the law exam didn't really treat me the best. And after that, I was like, do I want to do this for another 3 years to then work and then go and fight and change the system? And instead, I was like, what would a grounds up, bottoms up version of that look like? And that's sort of what pushed me in the direction of more entrepreneurial activity.
That's really interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
very very kind of similar realizations that there's better ways or there's more effective ways to have impact.
Yeah, both are important. I think it's just the type of person that might do maybe one versus the other. And then so you decide to take the other route. How do you land on Battelle as the product?
So Damien, who I mentioned, my co-founder, he actually it was his kind of brainchild, and he very much had seen people around him, friends. So he doesn't have kids, neither do I, which we can speak about as well as a. There's an often, that old adage of you have to feel the pain to be able to solve it. We kind of are. We're bucking that trend. Um, and he kind of had seen it from his friends, and it was his sort of inception, and it just completely resonated with me on so many levels. I think on a very personal level, I've always been ambitious and I want to be able to run this company, or at the time a company, but I also want to have a family one day. And it was this idea that it felt incredibly more difficult if you try to add a child who's not sleeping into the mix. And unfortunately the stats show this is the case. I think it's 43% of women leave the workforce after having kids. And the really interesting thing is that actually that increases with seniority. So when you jump to the most senior females in the workforce, that goes to 61%. And it's so counterintuitive because those are the women who are at the peak of their career, who are at the top of their game, and they're the ones who are leaving. And I think it's just because you get to a point where you've got a really demanding, really stressful job, and you've got a child who's waking up 2, 4, 10 times a night, and just something has to give. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's either the child, which it invariably isn't. So it's then either the parent, one of the parents' careers, unfortunately, usually the mums, or it's actually solving the problem, or it's the mental health of the parents. And I think we see that a lot as well. There's a huge amount of parental burnout, especially in the US. So I think
Yeah.
from my side, it was this, yeah, it was this fear, I guess, as well, that just completely, I got it. And even though I hadn't sort of felt the pain firsthand, it was a fear of mine, that I've sort of tackled to be able to make it not have to be a fear of mine.
Cool. So then the next thing I wanted to get into was sort of the tagline of what you're
Yeah.
doing, or the slogan is like, not the slogan, or the promise, the brand promise is like 2 weeks. We'll teach you how to put your kids to sleep, or 2 weeks in 5 minutes or less. How? That seems like pretty bold promise.
It is a bold promise. It's been what we've kind of had from the beginning. I think the really interesting thing about children's sleep is, number one, it's very formulaic, uh, from the child's perspective, but the biggest influencing factor is the parent. And so, really, it actually comes down to influencing and changing parent behavior. And once parent behavior changes, children's behavior changes like clockwork. And children, so maybe just to zoom out a little bit on terms of the sort of sleep training landscape,
Please.
0 to 6 months. So, most pediatricians will recommend that you can start sleep training at about 4 months old. We've got two different programs. The sort of a Batelle babies program, which is 0 to 6 months. So we've kind of pushed that a little bit later. So anywhere between sort of 4 months and 6 months old, a child develops what's called object permanence, meaning that they understand themselves as distinct from their parents. And that's the age at which, or the developmental stage at which you can actually start to sleep train them. Before that, however, there is still a huge amount you can do to make sure that you are laying that foundation down correctly. So if you kind of look at the two kind of products we have, I would say the one is much more of a preventative measure, which is how do you really make sure the foundation is set up correctly so that you don't have to go through these, usually a 6 month regression is really where it hits. And then on the other side is if you do have a pre-existing problem and your child is older than 6 months, then we can solve that. And it's really, yeah, it's about sort of understanding. I think that the secret sauce you asked, it's about really personalizing the solution to the family and to their needs. Because I think especially in today's world where, people are busy and there's split households and there's multiple caregivers involved and there's daycare and there's just a whole host of different variables, never mind sort of the parental preferences that come in. So do you want to co-sleep with your child? Do you want to, do you have a sibling that they share a room with? All of these variables change the way that a parent needs to interact with that child in order to get them to that goal. And so really I would say the secret sauce is that it's a hyper personalized experience to a family unit. And it's not just looking at the child in isolation, but it's looking at the child within that familial context. And the family system as a whole is what we work with.
So you land on Battelle, you kind of choose between these two paths. Is it more the preventative, or are you trying to solve something that's more acute?
Yeah.
And then where do you go from there? Do you meet a coach?
Yeah, so we worked with sort of sleep trainers. There were a number that we spoke to, and sort of as we've grown and as we've developed, we've kind of brought on as many experts as we can in various fields to kind of really inform what is the best intervention, so to speak, for specific families. So whether it's lactation specialists, doulas, sleep experts, you name it, and really creating and kind of this evolving content that is able to really be targeted at specific families. In terms of your first question about preventative versus corrective or sort of remedial, we focus most of our efforts on really solving this problem for families. And it's something that, parents, it's a problem that is so acute and is so felt in the family and has such a wide net of consequences that parents want to solve it quickly and they want to solve it sort of efficiently, but they also want to be able to have a structure that it's not, if 5 months down the line they go traveling, and this is maybe we can talk too about how restrictive does a family need to be.
Yeah.
Realistically, life happens. You don't want to be sitting indoors and saying no to every dinner invitation because you're worried you're going to throw your child's sleep schedule off. The reality is life has got to be fit in around, it's got to fit in around life. And effectively, we teach parents not only how to solve the problem in a time frame, but we also then give them the skills to be able to deal with any future regressions, travel, starting daycare, and really kind of give them a roadmap to how to interact with their child's sleep for the long term. Um, yeah,
Can you, I know it's, I don't want to give away all your secrets, but can you share some of the principles? Because as I've talked, I'm also not a parent yet,
absolutely.
but as I've spoken with some of the parents, it's like you hear they're like, yeah, you just have to be ready for your baby to cry a lot. And it has to be, you have to kind of sleep, walk away. And whereas some parents like can't do that, and they feel too bad for their children or their babies, so they don't develop that sort of they don't give them that independence or leeway to sort of develop that independence, let's say. So I'm curious, what are the kind of the guiding principles when it comes to sleep training?
Yeah, very good question. So I think the fundamental kind of principle is that all children, it's in a child's best interest to sleep. And I think as a society, we've normalized this idea that, oh, you're going to have a kid, or good luck on sleep for the next couple of years. And actually, when you think about that, it doesn't just disrupt the parent, it disrupts the child. And so then if you kind of go back to first principles, why is that child actually then waking up so frequently if that's a problem? Or why are they taking an hour to get to bed? Why are they fighting sleep so much? It comes down to fundamentally, they don't feel safe in that, let me backtrack again. I'll go back to the fact that everything is based around the parent, and parents are the safest place for their children. And so when a parent is, rocking their child to sleep and then the child falls asleep in the mom's arms, let's say, as a tangible example, she then puts the child into the crib, and a child just like us goes through sleep cycles. And when they go through when they come out of one of their sleep cycles and become a little bit more aware of the world around them, they start to realize, hold on, I'm not being held anymore. I can't feel that mom is still holding me. Something must be wrong. And so it's almost like this little alarm bell goes off in their brain saying, hold on, you need to wake up. You need to check that you're still safe. They wake up. They're in a crib that they don't know is safe. They know they're safe in mom's arms, but they don't know yet that the crib is safe because nothing in their life has sort of taught them that yet. And so what happens is they wake up, they cry, and mum comes back into the room and picks the child up and kind of recreates that sense of feeling and of safety for the child. But inadvertently, by doing that, it's reinforcing that you weren't safe in your crib, but don't worry, you're safe with me. And sort of you get into these cycles, and that's just one sort of small example of how those sort of cycles can start. But with the premise that it's about teaching a child how to fundamentally feel safe in their bed, in their sleep space, in their crib, independently of that parent. And so the way we kind of approach it, the underlying principles is we really teach parents how to engage, not disengage. And so I think to your point, parents don't like just closing the door and walking away. And so because it's about changing parent behavior in a way that they feel confident and they feel comfortable doing. It's about how do you be there for your child? How do you help them to get through these big emotions? And yes, there is crying. If your child's being used to rock to sleep and they're not going to be rocked to sleep one night, they're going to get upset. But you're going to be there and you're going to be showing them that there is nothing to be frightened of. And so even though there is a learning curve, it's a learning curve within sort of the safety net of the parent being responsive and being able to engage in a way that really shows the child that, hey, you're good, you're safe, you can go to sleep. And it's really once a child innately understands that and learns that, it's so powerful because it's not just a habit then that can be broken very easily where, the child gets sick and then let's say dad needs to go back into the room and look after the child because the child's sick. And suddenly the child thinks, hold on, that felt so much better. I felt so much more secure. I'm going to start crying again because maybe it'll work again. Last time I cried, it worked. And so this is a way where like you actually teach them, and we use a lot of play in the method. We use a lot of teaching them how to feel comfortable in the daytime as well, to really focus on those underlying tenets of kind of feeling comfortable, feeling safe, and building up almost there's almost a sense of independence, and in a way it's the start of resilience, the way that's how I see it, because you're teaching them that, hey, listen, it can be hard, but I am here, I'm not going anywhere, and you are fundamentally safe. This is a safe world. And I think there's something really kind of profound in that, actually.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's like philosophical in a
Yeah,
way, and it's kind of starting this development process that a lot of us are into, like optimization and all, physical, mental, etc. Like at such a young age, kind of bringing that
completely.
consciousness, or that, like, sort of that awareness to parents and their babies. And go for it.
Sorry, but
Yeah.
yeah, maybe just to add, because just to riff off what you're saying, it's sleep is the most vulnerable time for a person. We close our eyes. You don't know what's going on around you. And you have to by default be able to trust that you're going to be safe to be able to sleep soundly. And I think that it's that first obstacle where children have to sort of learn how to, yeah, it's the start of resilience, because it is that vulnerable moment. It's that early teaching moment of vulnerability, and how you respond to that as a parent can really be used as a learning and a teaching opportunity.
Yeah, it's kind of also funny for me because as I've been in and around the wellness space, there are companies that are focused on coaching adults into sleep, and I've sort of like balked at it, like, oh, like, do you really need like a human to like tell you how to sleep? But like when it comes to parents and children, like it makes more intuitive sense to me, and I'm curious what you've learned about your own sleep hygiene and your own sleep, kind of starting a company that's focused on helping parents teach their children how to sleep.
I think, interestingly, my learnings have been less in sleep specifically and more. What has completely blown me away is the more I've gotten into this, the more fascinated I've become, because parents really do shape children's perspectives of the world. And I think my learnings have been quite self-reflective in terms of what has shaped me, and how much of that is a product of my parents. And if it's a product of my parents, is it something, is it necessarily true? And I've gone through this self-reflection of really kind of questioning my core beliefs, just because I've, to such a sort of deep degree, I've realized that everything is constructed in some way. And so on there's sort of two sides. I mean, as I mentioned, I don't have kids yet. I do want to have a family one day. And so my one sort of real key learning is, wow, parenting, you have so much power, whether you want it or not, whether you're intentional about it or not. There is so much power you wield over this child's perception of the world. And I think the perception of the world is one of the most key components. Like, the fundamental question, is this a safe place? And is it is this should I be in an opportunity mindset or a fear-based mindset? And I think that very simple, very kind of first principles starting point determines so much about how a child interacts with the world. So I think that the two kind of key learnings have been sort of this self-examination and questioning of my own childhood. And I had a wonderful childhood, so it's nothing sort of I was very, very lucky, but there are things that I've been able to question and examine as a result. And on the other side, it's this kind of much more, there's a lot more weight I'm putting into when I do want to become a parent, of how I think about that, right from sleep all the way through to how I interact with a child around food. Because as a parent, again, you shape that child's relationship with food, you shape their relationship with their bodies, you shape their relationship with other people to an extent. There's so much that parents have influence over. So I think, rather than sleep, which I think is also super interesting, and we have the former CEO of Aura Ring on our board, and it's been really
Oh, cool.
fascinating because he's very much in sort of adult sleep, and I'm an Aura Ring fan. I've had an Aura Ring actually pre Batelle, so I'm sort of a sleep nerd anyway. But it's more on the psychological parenting side, actually, that I've had my kind of key aha moments.
how do you feel about tools and products? I think predominantly the one I'm thinking about is snoo, that is sort of like making the sleep process easier through hardware for parents
Yeah.
and kids. Have you heard that it helps? Does it help create this safe environment, or do I've heard the feedback is, or the criticism on it, that it can make the baby or the kid too dependent on that sort of process. And yeah, how do you think about it?
So I personally am a huge fan of snoo. I think during those first few months where, parents can get the schedule of a child right, and they can certainly do the learning that they need to be able to build that foundation. Snoo is actually a really useful tool to actually help parents get some sleep in those early months. So I'm a huge fan just from a utility perspective. I think there is a negative, which is that it does create dependency. Not always, but I don't know the stats actually, but I would say I would guess most of the time. And the reason being is that child then learns that, in order to get sleep, they need to be rocked, because typically the snoo rocks. Well, that's one of the functionalities, the main functionality. And when you then try to transition the baby out of the snoo, that has to be replaced by something. So either parents then go to rocking the child in their arms, which is unsustainable because then you end up having to rock your child to bed every 45 minutes. Or you kind of have to then almost retrain them and sort of go through kind of the or get sleep training process, so to speak. I also think snoo, unfortunately, is quite limited in its utility in terms of the age. So depending on how big your child actually grows, how quickly, you can use the snoo from anywhere from about 3 months up to, I'd say, maximum about 6 months, I believe, is the upper
Oh, wow.
limit. So it's quite a short lifespan. I think it's a I mean, I personally, I would probably buy a snoo if I was to have a child, but be very intentional about how you use it. And especially when a child starts to develop that object permanence, if you know how to interact with the rocking element and sort of the snoo, I think there's ways that you can easily make that a seamless transition as opposed to quite a tricky transition sometimes.
Yeah, it was funny. I just ran into them at an HR conference, and they're also selling into the employer space, like Snow
Yeah.
as an employee benefit, which I thought interesting, and sort of a part of what they're selling in the benefits package is like a little bit of what you guys do. So it's always interesting for me as I see different business models to see one that's very hardware focused versus one that like Patel that's a lot more service based. I'd love to dig into something else that you mentioned around parents and kids and these different areas of life and the responsibility of parents and how that awareness has sort of grown on you as you kind of mentally prepare to have a family one day. And it's this like balance of like maybe what a lot of our parents did because there's no internet, which is like learning on the fly, versus like programs like Battelle, where you have 2 weeks to do a deep dive on something, and sort of where and how you envision like the balance of those two um worlds, where you're just like learning by doing, and two, you're just like you're getting these expert opinions or these science driven opinions on how to do things.
Yeah. I think there's, we have evolved so much, and I think parenting needs to evolve. And especially if we think about who do who do our children need to be in order to be able to interact with and understand a world where there's going to be exponential change on multiple fronts. So I think the requirements to be a successful person in the future is going to be very different to sort of what our parents sort of were, I would guess, bringing us up to be, or maybe the sort of previous generation up to be. There's very different, I would say, goal functions just because there is such exponential change, especially in technology. And I think there's you can either completely wing it. I think the truth of the matter is there are going to be consequences, unintended or intended, and that can be good or bad. It's simply a matter. The way I see it is quite logically. It's sort of you put inputs, and you're going to get certain outputs. And the more I think because there is such an information overload, and there is so much noise today, I think it's very difficult for parents to just sort of say, ah, cool, I'm just going to go with the flow. And from so many parents I've spoken to, there's like a deep rooted anxiety. I think that's the kind of overriding feeling I hear from parents today. There's sort of this overwhelm and this anxiety and this desire to do good by their kids, but they don't know what that looks like in the modern day context. And I think that's where it becomes really useful to sort of understand, what are my goal functions and how do I change my behavior, which I can fully control? How do I change that to shape my child's world in a way that is going to be beneficial for their health, for their education, for their outcomes? So I think there's no right or wrong way to do it. And I think a large portion of it is, as a parent, if you can be the more kind of calm and the less anxious you are as a parent, I think the better. So if that is saying, hey, I'm just going to go with the flow, my feeling is just go with the flow, and your child vibes off you. And we see this all the time. Children pick up so much of their parents. And I read a stat the other day. A child who has a parent with a mental health disorder is 75% more likely to develop a mental health disorder themselves. Now that's on sort of the more extreme side of things. But the same the same is true. We as humans pick up on what is going on around us, and especially as a child, you have to survive. And so you pick up very much on what your caregivers are sort of feeling and putting out. And so my kind of first point of advice would be, go with what makes, like, if you feel more comfortable winging it, by all means do that. If you need more help and you feel like you need some kind of control over the outcomes, then take that. But really focus on what works for you. And there's no right or wrong way of parenting. I think people have a lot of opinions on it. And I think that's part of the challenges, especially on social media. There are a lot of polarizing views. And even sleep training, it can be so contentious. And there's a lot of, yeah, a lot of contentious, often very vitriolic opinions. And I think you just got to do what works for you as a family, quite honestly, and that can come in many forms.
So how as a company do you cut through the many opinions? Like how do you decide which opinion to go with? Is it having a board of advisors with different opinions and sort of figuring out the best practices? I find that what you're
Yeah,
saying is also very relevant to just like the health and wellness space in general. There's like, should I be eating meat or should I be going plant-based? And I think and then there's, all these influencers and micro influencers and brands that have their own agenda. So it can be hard to really like cut through the noise and know what to believe and understand. But then in that process, there's been specific individuals who have really taken a data driven or science driven approach. And I think that's really resonating with a big portion of the market. Is like, I'm not just going to hear a bunch of opinions, but here are ones that are actually backed by science. And I'm curious, like, how
completely.
you think about that.
Yeah. So what's really interesting is the sleep training space and the behavioral sleep intervention space. The data has been so thin. And until recently, the largest sort of sleep training studies were done on, I think the largest was about 300 participants, and they were done through survey. And there's, there's only so much information you can gather from a survey you send out to a parent who has their own perception and they're putting on or own lens of seeing things. And I think it has been this lack of data driven approach that was sort of the first thing that we tried to solve for. So we've really taken the approach where we've had over 3,000 families go through the program, and we've we've got a panel of experts. So yes, to your point, we draw on bodies of knowledge, and I think it's about understanding the best knowledge that we can get our fingertips on, we will take. And so as a company, we're very non-dogmatic, in the sense of we're not saying this, you have to do this and it's the only way to do it, but rather saying what is the best information we know and what works for you. And I think the second piece is then actually it's an adaptive process. So it depends on the family, it depends on the circumstance. A family who want to co-sleep, it's not our place to say don't co-sleep by any means. And I
Co-sleep
think
is sleeping together in the same bed.
exactly. So sleeping in the same
Yep.
bed, again, there's sort of contention around that. And if a family chooses to do that, it's completely their prerogative. And so really what we try and do is, how do we support you within that framework? Or if you want to sleep in the same room as your child, or whatever constraints you might have, it's about sort of personalizing it and adapting it to the families and trying to take a non-dogmatic view to how do we actually solve your problem given your circumstance, given your set of variables, given your family context, really.
And you also, one thing I wanted to circle back to you is like, as you thought about starting this company, and you know, one thing that was top of mind for you was like health education and how people consume this information. And I'm curious, like, based off of what you've learned through 3,000 or so parents going through the program, and now as you think about getting into other verticals of education, such as relationship to body, relationship to food, how has your idea of the form factor of content sort of evolved? Like, what do you think is the hybrid approach between pre-recorded content modules, or like this journey that's like asynchronous and you can kind of go through it on your own, versus time with a coach or a person or expert, in terms of having that like one that back and forth sort of like therapist, live with an expert?
I think what we've found is that the more proactive we are with families, meaning the more information they have up front and the more they understand what to expect up front, the better the outcomes. So it really is, I think parental confidence shouldn't be underestimated in how useful it is or how crucial it is when sort of interacting with a child. If a parent is visibly nervous about what they're doing, the child's going to pick up on that. And so the more they feel they are in control of the situation, they know exactly what to do, and they know they have the support, the better. I think there's also very much a place. We have a team of 24/7 sleep experts who literally anytime, day or night, a parent can reach out and say, "Hey, I'm struggling. I need help," and they will get help. And that's also been a really useful tool, both for us to learn, but also to be able to help the families that need that extra support in the moment. I think where it gets really interesting though is when you start thinking about how sort of especially recent technology kind of supercharges that and sort of can really assist with creating a beautiful customer experience where you know where a family unit can be understood in sort of a millisecond, and you can sort of have advice that is contextualized and personalized at your fingertips at any time, at any kind of point in time. So I think I think especially with sort of the opportunities that have opened up with for the likes of GPT, there's in sort of the parent coach dynamic, there's huge scope for growth in that.
Cool. Um, Gigi, do you have a couple more minutes if we were to
Yeah,
dive a little deeper? Okay, cool.
absolutely.
Anything that I haven't asked that I should, like, in terms of the product offering, the company, sort of the other verticals that you're planning to get into before we get to know you a little bit better?
I think actually probably no. I think it was pretty comprehensive. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
off
And
the top of my
you
head,
all
no.
have, yeah, you all have great content on the site, in terms of, and your own video about getting a little bit deeper into the sort of the why and the how. Um, Something I like to do is some rapid fires, just so folks can understand a little bit more of who you are outside of Batelle, and how that impacts the business. Would you be up for that?
Of course.
Okay, great. So, what's a book that you've reread or recommended, or one that just has left a lasting impact on you?
This is such a difficult question for me because there's so many. I think most recently, one called The Infinite Game, I found fascinating. It was sort of the philosophical application of game theory, which was really interesting. There's also a book called Decoding Reality, which is all about information theory and how we view information and consume information, which also, again, I think it's so fundamental and shapes so much of sort of how the world works. And then maybe on a more kind of relevant level, one that I found really challenging was a book called, oh goodness, The Gospel of Wellness. and it's by a woman called Rena Raphael. And she basically, it's a very it was a very difficult read in some ways because she really looks at the wellness industry and like all of the cracks. And I kind of think what you were talking about before, of there's a lot of different people and a lot of noise, and she really helps to cut through that noise. And I found that incredibly useful, and very insightful. So, if not challenging.
Wow. All those sound great. I'm excited. Is the Infinite Game Simon Sinek?
No, it is it's not Simon Sinek. Let me get the author. Uh I think, oh, James Cass.
Oh, Finite and Infinite Games.
Ah, that's it. Sorry, Finite and Infinite Games.
James
Yeah,
Cross. Okay, cool. Yeah, and the decoding reality is the universe is quantum information.
exactly. It's Vladko Vidral.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, cool. Yeah, the book to me that sounds the most similar to the Gospel of Wellness is I think it's actually uh he's from the UK, is a Bad Science. Have you read that?
I haven't. No.
No. That's a
Okay,
good one
that's
in
on my
terms of
list.
just like,
Thank you.
yeah, it's a short and sweet book in terms of like just like understanding how science has been manipulated in order to sell specific products or
Yeah,
theories, kind of historically, and like what to look at out for when people focus on science based products.
completely.
Uh, what is a like product that you love buying at the grocery store that's like always stocked in your pantry, if you have one?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. I think. I'd say the packet rice, like the rice that you just put in the microwave and it's ready in 2 minutes. That's
Okay.
that's a that is a very useful one for me because sometimes I do not have the patience to wait for rice to cook. Um, so yeah, that's probably we've always got some packet rice in the pantry.
Interesting. I haven't gotten that one before.
It's a weird one.
Yeah. What's a purchase you've made under $200 that in the last 3 to 6 months that's provided the most value to you?
I'd say probably it's probably books. I just find there's so much that I gain from, I think, as varied reading as possible. So, and Audible, maybe that's another one. Um, Being able to just sort of put in my earphones and walk and listen to a wide range of topics, I find it's really useful. Yeah, I think that's the best purchase.
And then on the book side, are you buying physical books or are you a Kindle person?
I prefer physical. I have a mix. I've
Yeah.
literally got a spread between Kindle, Audible, and then physical. And my goal is to one day get all of the Audible books and all of the Kindle books all into physical form and into a beautiful library in my office. That's sort of the goal. But I've got some way to go still.
Cool. And do you read daily?
I'd like to say yes at the moment. No, work's been
Yeah.
busy. It's the goal. It definitely is the goal.
Yeah.
But at least sort of I'd say twice, 3 times a week. And usually on the weekends I'll do kind of a deep dive for a few hours. That's more my style. It's like sort of an immersive deep,
That's
yeah, a
nice.
couple of hours in the sun. Yeah.
Yeah. And then speaking of like audio, one of the questions I ask is like, are there any favorite podcasts or podcast episodes or any that have left a lasting impact on you?
I think there are multiple. I tend to go through sort of phases with podcasts. At the moment, what I'm finding most interesting is My First Million, just because it's quite relevant in terms of what's going on sort of on a day-to-day basis or sort of a topical basis. But then it's also, I'm finding it fascinating I'm sort of very much in this more tech world, but to hear more, I would say, traditional businesses and business models that, for example, real estate or, laundry businesses, just things that are more kind of tangible, that I'm sort of quite removed from. And it's always really interesting to sort of hear to hear how those models kind of typically work.
Cool. Yeah, I haven't actually. I've listened to one podcast on the of one of those, and it was the Huberman one,
Oh,
which I thought
yes.
was really cool to see like the business side of him and hear that story. And
Oh,
I
I'd
saw that.
actually,
Yeah, go for it.
no, I was going to say, I'd love to listen to that. I'm a big Huberman fan.
Yeah, yeah, I feel like it's super relevant to
Yeah.
sort of what you're building. Um, and I'm sure you're into Matt Walker, Why We
Yeah.
Sleep as
Very
well.
much. Very much.
What's your signature dish or favorite thing to cook besides rice?
I think it's probably shakshuka. I really enjoy cooking that. It's like it's really easy and it's really low lift, but it always looks like a lot of effort and time has gone into it. And it's really delicious. So yeah, I like, and you can have like a beautiful, really nice, fresh loaf of kind of sourdough or something alongside. So say shakshuka. Um, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good one. Um, what is one thing that you're grateful for today?
I'm grateful. I know we spoke that we were a bit tired. I had a friend who is visiting from the UK, and he came for dinner, and it was just so lovely and to sort of see him, and just really grateful that people. It's really impactful when people make an effort, and yeah, really grateful that he did.
Amazing. Best piece of advice you've ever received?
I think it wasn't advice per se. It was I read this somewhere, but the kind of thing that stuck with me is you get what you settle for. And that's sort of one of the sort of mantras that I really like because I think it's very true.
Nice. Who do you look up to and why?
Again, I think sort of multiple people for multiple different reasons. I wouldn't say one specific person. It's more I think attributes of specific people, and also in the context, I think it changes those attributes given sort of what the constraints on certain people are at certain times. So probably a bit of a boring answer, but it I think that, yeah, there's something you can learn from everyone, and you can look up to in everyone, and I think I prefer that approach to sort of one specific person.
I like this. You have like a specific philosophy across your answers.
I,
Uh,
I do.
from the
You're
beginning. um, what's like the craziest or most out there thing you do to optimize your own wellness? Like which one of these powders or promises from
Oh
the
my
gospel
goodness.
of wellness do you actually?
Yeah, this is it. So I've never gone sort of the I've never used crystals or anything, but I've pretty much done everything else. So I've done well, I think there are a few that I will stand by, and I'll put my hands up and say there is. I can sort of tangibly feel differences immediately. One being cold immersion, so it's submerging yourself in freezing cold water for a couple of minutes. Just that the physiological change is so tangible. I think breath work as well. That's been sort of a huge biohack, so to speak, just because it's a complete change of state, and you kind of get into a flow state, but through very mechanical means rather than meditating. I find very difficult sometimes. Um, and then I think sleep is actually it. I've been sort of tracking it for 5 years, and I think I haven't done anything crazy with it. I've never done those ones. I know some people try sleep for 3 hours, wake for sleep 3 hours, sleep for three
Oh
hours. There
yeah,
was sort of a
that's
trend that went
that's
on.
a little
I
crazy.
don't think, yeah, I don't think I could. I'm the kind of person who needs 9 hours of sleep a night, and so it's
Nine
more about,
hours.
yeah,
Wow.
I don't always get it, but I get close. I'm sort of
Yeah.
minimum 8, but between 8 and 9, and I kind of safeguard my sleep quite fiercely sometimes. So that's I'd
Yeah,
say,
it's
yeah,
prioritizing it is one of the, as I'm like getting deeper, it's like one of the biggest things you could do to like feel good and have more
yeah.
energy. On the opposite side of that question, what is your like least favorite piece of health advice?
That is a very good question. Oh, I actually this is going to be super controversial. I think probably it's meditation.
Good.
And the reason is that, yeah, exactly. Give me the controversy, the controversy. I think it's meditation, and I think it's because I just don't find it effective for me. And I can see the value in it, but I think there's more effective ways to get to the same end state. So I know practicing, oh, actually, I've got an even more controversial one, actually, is I don't believe in gratitude practices. And the reason I don't is I can see why it would work in a lot of cases, but for me, whenever I'm listing things that I'm grateful for, and I mean, I did just list that I'm grateful for a friend who came, but if I sit and I think, oh, I'm so grateful for my husband, I'm so grateful for this and the next thing, embedded in that is this fear that that can be taken away. And so, what I don't like about gratitude practices is that it almost like by hankering onto things I've already got, it puts me in a fear mindset rather than a fearless mindset. And so for me, it's not being grateful for things that I have. It's just trying to cultivate that feeling of being grateful generic, just like generally, but not specifically for things that I have that could be taken away, because that feels fragile to me. And it's never worked for me. So I sort of had to figure out why wasn't it working for me, and that was my rationale.
That's pretty good. I've never heard those two. So, on one end, you mentioning breath work, it's a form of meditation, and I think I have actually found it as one of the most effective forms of meditation, especially after you do the more sort of like intense breathing part and you're just kind of relaxing afterwards. It's like the most calm my mind has ever been. It's like almost like I've experienced like a thought coming in, and like you can almost visualize the thought coming in and then it just disappears. So it's kind of cool that you've to hear that you've had that experience with meditation. And then on the gratitude side, I recently had the opportunity to meet Martin Seligman, who's like the father of positive psychology,
Yes.
and really is known for kind of bringing a lot of that and doing a lot of the science behind positive psychology. And one thing that I asked him when I met him is like, what's the most tangible thing that you've applied from positive psychology to your own life? And he actually described something that I really liked, which was like he called it three good things. And it was, what are three good things that have happened to you in the last 24 hours? And I was like, oh, like a gratitude practice. Like, and he was like, no, like it's like just three good things that have happened to you. Like I woke up this morning, it was a good thing. Or like I saw my friend, it was a good thing. And I tried that. And he like mentioned writing it down. And then what I found actually is like it's a much more tangible way to kind of hack mentally hack like including a gratitude practice in your life where it sounds easy, like three good things. Like we all can mention three good things that have happened to us in the last 24 hours, and it's in it maybe we'll speak a little bit to even what you described in that, like that fearlessness. No, it's like, no, you don't need to be grateful for it. It's just a good thing that happened to you. So
Exactly. I really like that because there's a non-attachment to it that I think that's the problem for me in gratitude is this it's attachment to something that is current versus like, hey, I had a wonderful cup of coffee. It's in the past. I can't change it. I'm not holding on to it, but I'm super grateful for it. So actually, I think I'm going to try that because I think that would probably suit me far better than sort of the traditional ones.
amazing. Well, good thing I woke up this morning and we got to have this conversation. It was really fun. Um, glad I got to meet you. What time is it right now in South Africa?
It is 5:15 in the evening.
Okay, great. So
And you? What time is it for you? It's always interesting
eight
to just.
8:15 in the morning.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
So
this
gosh, you did have an early morning. Thank you. That's a
yeah,
good
yeah,
thing.
of
You
course.
got up
Yeah, I
even
slept
after
at 12. I slept at 12. I woke up at 6:30, so 6.5 hours. My sleep score on my not my Oura ring, but my 8 sleep was like, pay attention.
uh,
Pay attention today. Sometimes it like it causes more anxiety to actually look at it, but it's been a great pleasure to meet you, and your positive attitude and mood, and uh the coffee really helped. Um, where can folks learn more about you, Gigi, and about Batelle? Obviously, we're going to be kind of blasting you out to folks in our community and network, but anything else you'd like to leave with before we sign off today?
No, I think yeah, our website's probably the best, most straightforward place. There is also LinkedIn. We're sort of semi-active on social media. We haven't quite kind of gone the social media route yet. But I'd say the website's the best sort of starting point, and you can always chat with one of the team as well, who can sort of walk you through specifically what it would be if you signed up for you and your child, and kind of give a bit more detail in terms of what to expect.
Great. Yeah, and excited for the stuff that you all have in the docket. So thank you,
Absolutely.
Gigi.
Thank you, John.